Okay, gang. So this is going to be a value study demonstration. On the theme of water, I've got a couple pages of thumbnails, and we're going to focus right in here on the one with the submerged alligator with something sitting on the tip of his nose, which I've decided is a bird. Um, it's probably going to be a crow. So here's the line drawing. So line meaning text, contour line, but also texture where necessary, and then leading into this will just be a quick little snippet of building up the value on the paper. So we're using it's a gray sketch pad, and yes, I'm actually shading it in upside down. This is a trick that kind of can help you see your picture sort of more abstractly, that you can see forms, you can see composition, and not get locked into, fingernails. Um, and so I'm building it trying to build it up slowly. I tend to work faster than I should most of the time, so I've got a 6B pencil. I'm trying not to press too hard on the paper and just kind of let gravity do as much of the tone building work as possible. And the whole while looking at a number of my reference choices, um, which I have a folder of. So here's where the value stays at about a halfway point, where we have pencil leading up to the gray of the paper, and we get to bust out the conté crayon then. You can use a white pastel for this. You can use white chalk. That's pretty much what a conté crayon is at this point in history. So looking at, like I said, looking at reference, one thing I'm looking at here is photos of sort of agitated water deeply foreshortened. That when you look across a great expanse of anything really, it gets reflective, and water especially so. So it seems like the brightest lights of this composition are largely going to come from the sky ricocheting off of an agitated water surface. It's agitated because there's an alligator poking his nose up out of it, uh, maybe having a conversation. Um, but so the water, as we get closer to that horizon line, we will see a little bit of the reflection of the far side picking up. But you get out from the middle, and on a perfectly still day, you'd have like a complete one-to-one scale mirror image of the trees in the back. But in this case, our foreground is simply just not smooth, and so we get this very light reflection of the foreshortened plane, picking up all of the ambient light from above it. Now, one thing you want to be sure of in doing the pencil shading part of a value study like this is remember that that's only half of your values. That you only need to shade up to the gray of your paper. If you overdo it, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting the conté crayon to adhere. This is because graphite has two purposes in the world. One of them is as a drawing medium, and the other one is as a lubricant. It's very slippery. That's why it gets shiny looking and picks up that glare to it. So if you've drawn in too many places on your paper, if you haven't left some room for the conté crayon to build up half your value scale, you're gonna have a lot of trouble drawing over the graphite because the chalkiness of the conté will just slide over it. And if you work too hard to get them to go together, you're just going to get a kind of slimy, silvery smear. One benefit of this is as you'll notice I'm not actually doing a lot of blending with my fingers. You'll see me come up like that every now and then, and it's almost like eraser light. Just evening a couple things out, which is not quite the same as blending them. Now, what I was going to say is that one thing that can work to your advantage with the slipperiness of the graphite is when you try to work around edges, or as we're going to see up here with the palm trees, like these kind of intricate little hollows around it for the white to get. Now you can do this and then always come back and clean up with the pencil. But the slipperiness can actually help you a little bit as you get to edges that are graphite heavy. That the conté crayon is just simply, it's not really going to want to draw over the palm tree. So it's actually pretty easy to get an isolated white in some of these little crevices and things. Now, one of the nice things about the conté crayon is you have the whole thing to work with, and I'm just using a little broken piece, but the whole of that is the side for broad strokes. The four corners of it function as a point. So you can always find, essentially what would be like a sharpened pencil point edge to it. And if you can't, you can always break it one more time and use one of the corners there. Get a couple little pockets of light poking through the trees. Pinch some light into these, again, these little crevices and geometric bits of negative space going on in the palm trees. Okay, and now we're about ready to move underwater. So in building up the lights, I'm thinking in terms of a hierarchy at first. Like what are my lightest areas? Where is he closest to the surface of the water, where the most light would get in, but also where the planes of his body are foreshortened in a way that is going to pick up the most glare. That when light hits something, we've got, there's two forces working to shade it. There's modeling, which is our word for what we always think of as being shading something, where that smooth transition from dark to light, but really however light something gets when light hits it. But then there's always a reflection of light, with very few exceptions. That point where the light hitting something reflects off of it and becomes a much purer light than the illuminated object. And in the case of this fella, those foreshortened planes, like the top of the water, are going to be a place where that definitely happens. And now we're getting into a little bit more of that sort of modeling type of shading, just how the sort of ambient light coming down from the surface of the water illuminates the alligator, and how, as the light bounces around under the water, how it comes up and catches this reflected light, secondary light source edge on him. Which secondary light source is that reflected light that comes back up out of shadows at things, is a large part of what gives a rendered shape its three-dimensionality. Now there's two thoughts going on in a lot of this too. Is right in here we're dealing with the three-dimensional shape of the alligator's arms as a full volume, but then also how those volumes are made up out of like scales and wrinkles and things. So this is one of the things where it sort of benefits to, again, press lightly and kind of keep your body at a distance from your drawing. Don't get your nose stuck up on the details, so that even as you draw details, you can see the whole picture at once. And so once we've got a full value scale built up of the alligator, I can start thinking more about how I want him to sit against the water. Do I want him lighter or darker than the water the murky water as it gets up to the surface? And I want the shadows at the core of him to recede, to be darker than it, so that we, accept the idea that this water is luminous enough to give him that reflected light on his belly and his double chin. And picking up little bits of glare on his teeth as well, and some of that ambient light trickling down and hitting the the seaweed and swamp grass coming up from the bottom. I want this water to be kind of murky, and again, I'm looking at a fair amount of reference on this to sort of see like how it recedes into the back. Looking at something through dirty water it's an exaggerated form of atmospheric perspective, which is the way that contrast changes on say a rainy day or over a distance. Now in this case, just for fun, I'm going through and thinking about how light hits the ripples on the water, and you get these fun little squiggly patterns that bounce around through the water. Where it hits his belly there was actually not even all that logical, but I figure if we've built up enough believability in the picture, putting some in for design's sake might be okay. I just have to remember then to get some of these little cross bits of light, ripples of light, to go across the seaweed bottom, and through any gunk that it's passing through on the way down through the water, and that will at least give us the idea that those shapes could reflect up and bounce off Mr. Alligator's belly. All right, some more little, once you've got the whole thing covered, it's okay to go back and do some look at it together as a whole and see where things still need to be built up or where they need to be kind of taken back a little bit. We want to make sure that for all the highlights we have in here, we don't just have a bunch of distracting pockets of white, just islands. We want to make sure that we've got as many sort of networks of light and dark running through the picture as possible. So that it doesn't become just an alligator, it doesn't just become light and dark. It's a picture. We want it all to be a picture. And here we come around to the final product. And if this were to be a full color image, this would be the amount of work that went into creating the sketch. This would be the value study that we could then progress to color from, because all of the values and the composition and the character, all of those problem solving bits have been taken care of leading up to color and texture being the next decisions in line. Painting is difficult enough, and so the more we can achieve in a value study for something like this, the more we can pay our attention to color scheme and atmosphere and texture.